Hey gang, with 4.0 dropping to Open PTU, it certainly seems like this monster of a patch is probably dropping imminently. Since this patch is a much bigger deal than, well, I guess pretty much any previous big number patch outside of maybe 3.0. So I guess outside of the last one, I feel like I should throw down a benchmark of what I'm expecting from 4.0. And what I'm not expecting. My hopes, my dreams, and fears for 4.0, in other words. So if that sounds good, let's get this. So say that 4.0 is a big deal is pretty much the understatement of the year. And this being December, well, yeah. Anyways, 4.0 is going to be a really ridiculously big deal for this project. For the last decade, each time CIG released a new patch with new content, it added just a little more strain to the servers. And yeah, they would still go through and optimize what they could, even though that was a lower priority for them. But as time went on, it was pretty clear to the community that the weight of the various systems was crushing the game. I mean, there was a reason why CR teared up when he saw server meshing in action. They've been trying to get this tech off the ground for a long time in a lot of different iterations, and this one seems to be the one that'll work. But while server meshing is the biggest thing coming to 4.0, it's hardly the only thing. So let's hop in, shall we? But yeah, of course, server meshing is the main thing. For my own personal expectations, we've been hearing for the better part of, man, a decade that the reason why the NPCs were so derpy was server tech. And that was the reasons why missions were limited and game loops and pretty much everything. It was all because of server tech. And the reason the new loops weren't coming in was also due to server tech. You get the idea. While it was never outright stated by CIG, at least the view in the community for a while is that the servers have been one of the big roadblocks for this project as a whole. Like with a lot of these bigger patches, I'm not expecting a night and day change in performance and content, but the hope, my hope anyways, would be that we would see steady progress with maybe some huge steps. So better performance of NPCs, which we're actually already kind of seeing right now. I don't know if you've done a bunker mission lately, but it's hard to come out of a bunker mission without some sort of injury, either a tier 3 or tier 2, maybe a tier 1 if you're really unlucky. While the NPCs aren't as impressive as we've seen in some of the Squadron 42 demos, they're not bad. I've actually been flanked and flushed out a time or two. I haven't had any of them throwing grenades at me yet, but kind of their maneuvers have been pretty impressive to what we've seen so far. Don't get me wrong, they're still derpy, but they're better than they have been for a long time and quite a bit more accurate. And the NPCs are one thing, but if this project's ever going to be an actual MMO, we need to start seeing MMO-like numbers for the player counts per server. 100, 200, that's fine, but if Star Citizen is ever going to be a true MMO, there needs to be thousands. I'm not really expecting to see that until dynamic server meshing is in sometime later, but we should start seeing some benefits in the nearest future with larger player counts just due to server meshing itself. But larger player counts aren't the only thing that'll be growing in 4.0. I'm not sure how many of you were around for the 2.6 days, when the entire verse was just a death ball of Crusader that you couldn't land on, its 3 moons, which you also couldn't land on, and a handful of stations. One of which was the gas station, which was kind of cool, and I can't remember the name of it. I want to say Astro Armada, but that's the... I'll think of it eventually, or let me know down in the comments. I remember landing there all the time. I want to say Kovalex, but it's not Kovalex. They really should bring those stations back, but throw in a Greasy Spoon Diner, a knick-knack store. You get the idea. Just these stopover places you can refuel at in the deep dark, but I digress. So back in those days, you couldn't land on the moons, the planets, or really anything else. You could fly to an area and that was about it. I don't even remember how many people could be on a server at the same time, but it wasn't much. 12 or so? I think it was real limited. Anyways, then 3.0 dropped and Hurston opened up. We could actually land on a planet. More than that, we could travel across the entire system. We got Delamar, and within a couple years, we had all the planets and moons in the Stanton system. And that's where we've been for a few years now. Even though that volume of game area is enormous, it's already beginning to feel a little stale. Stale might be a bit too harsh. I guess we have a lot of volume, but not a lot going on within that volume. And yeah, part of that limitation is due to the state of the servers. But even so, we've been in Stanton for nearly a decade now in one iteration or another. Stanton, for all that space, is starting to feel small. Well, that won't be a problem with Pyro. Not for a while, at least. Some members of the Carnival and I are going into 4.0 with the idea of hitting every location in Pyro. And it says something that, even if we were going to make that goal just Stanton and visiting every single location, we probably still wouldn't be able to pull it off in a regular patch cycle, or even maybe even a year. And Pyro's even larger with even more locations. So we're going to have an enormous system to explore, one that's entirely new and will continue to be iterated on and expanded upon. And it will have more locations and areas of interest added to it. That is a really hard thing to discount. But one thing I'm hearing over and over from worried players is that Pyro's going to be locked off for them. Not because they won't be able to navigate the jump point or even just start there, but because they think other players are going to pirate or grief them. And a quick aside here before your fingers fly to those keyboards, I do not consider piracy and marauding to be the same thing as griefing. Good? Good. But anyways, people are afraid they're going to drop into Pyro and immediately be pirated over and over and over again with zero consequences for the pirates or the marauders. For the second part, well, okay, I mean, that's true. This is kind of a lawless system. But I feel like the next tier of bounty hunting will have to be hot on the trail of 4.0's release, or I would hope it is. For one, the idea of a bounty hunter having to go into the lion's den of Pyro to hunt their prey is pretty cool in my book, and there will be a neat counterplay of evil lawbreakers breaking the law evilly in Stanton and then running for Pyro, and then bounty hunting players having to pop across the portal to track them down. But for right now, yeah, there's no consequences. Certainly no consequences in Pyro. So are non-PvP players doomed? Our solo players are the players that don't want to deal with Pyros just totally screwed when it comes to Pyro. Well, no. So here's the thing about space. There's a lot of it. And Pyro, yeah, tons. Now, if you're the kind of player that immediately goes out and watches the how to make a gazillion space buckaroos in 5 minutes trading this one commodity at this one location vids, guess who's also watching those vids? Guess who probably already knew that location X was the best place to get that super valuable commodity? So yeah, put another way, remember when Quantanium was super valuable, or RMC, or Widow, and the pirates would just wait in the area around that commodity where it could be picked up to either extort a huge sum from the person running that cargo, or more recently, just soft death that ship and take that cargo? Well, that's even more true in Pyro. They won't even have to shut off a comsat. So what do you do if you don't want hours of playtime to be used to fund a pirate's extravaganza? Get this. Don't do predictable things. That number one trade spot, have you thought about the number two trade spot? That lucrative commodity? Have you thought about a mildly less lucrative commodity? Because I'll tell you this, Pyro is a big place, and the pirates can't be everywhere. They'll camp the places that give them the biggest return for their time invested. And yeah, that means they'll be watching the same trade secret vids you are. You can risk it and go for the big return, but just be aware that you're shrinking the volume of space down to a single solitary location, and that makes you much easier to find. if you don't take advantage of that space that Pyro has, well, okay, I won't engage in victim blaming, but you really should be smarter about where and what you're trading. That said, you might feel the risk is worth it, but just don't forget that there is a risk, and you might want, if the profits are particularly good, to bring along a friend or three. Even just someone that can slow the pirates down or distract the Manus or whatever they're using to lock you down will be enough that you might be able to get away and get that big payout. Anyways, I've talked about piracy enough, so moving on. This one's kind of a fun one for me because I own so many ships, but also too, because there's so many ships that just don't really have a reason for existing at the moment. People might take them because they like them aesthetically, but they're not particularly good. I mean, there's a reason why people fly most everything else. So I'm talking ships like the Starfarer, which might actually begin to see some use in a system like Pyro, where everything is not only so spread out, but also where various locations will be locked down by rep with various pirating gang factions. Also, just imagine a whole system of Grim Hexes. Right now, lawful players kind of avoid Grim Hex just because people with crime stats can hang out there consequence free, and the ones that hang on to their crime stats for multiple game sessions are typically ganking other players to get that crime stat at that level. Now imagine an entire system of Grim Hexes. Yeah, people might be looking for other places to refuel, or might not be taking range into consideration and running out of fuel mid-trip. A Starfarer might be able to shine in that environment, even as a solo venture, but as usual, I don't recommend that for anything larger than a Connie. And speaking of the Connie, most people go for the Taurus or the Andromeda, but the Aquila, with its better range, might start popping up in popularity. For that matter, and you'll see a theme here, a lot of the quote-unquote exploration ships, from the Carrack to the 315P with their better range, might start to look like better options. Like the Cutter Rambler might be a better choice than the base Cutter, even though you're giving up a little bit of cargo space, because you can actually get from point A to point B in a place like Pyro. Alternatively, given those longer ranges and the rep locks, it might be possible that people start sticking closer to one specific area, aligning with the specific function and going for specialization. It's really hard to say, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it all plays out. So right off the bat, this isn't one that I'm expecting immediately. I don't think we're getting Quantum anytime soon, but I think we're going to start seeing shades of it, even in 4.0. The new economy will come with new commodities, new prices, scarcity, and so on. Until they drop Star Economy on us, we'll be getting the fake version, but I'm totally okay with that. While a huge, complicated, dynamic economy is, and I don't use this word lightly, amazeballs, I thoroughly enjoyed Privateer, and that was a wildly more simple system. I just want to see places start to make sense. This moon produces this ore. This location produces this commodity. And in order to produce that commodity, it needs an import of these other two commodities, like this ore, this plastic or whatever. You get the idea. Maybe not unique specializations, but still specializations. A reason to go to a specific place and a reason to actually travel somewhere you wouldn't normally travel to otherwise. I just really hope that CIG starts taking this a little more seriously. If we have been waiting for Quanta to hit for, say, a year, it wouldn't be so bad. But Tony Z first talked about this dynamic economy almost a decade ago. I think it might have been over a decade ago at this point. A stopgap trade system is completely warranted and, in my opinion, way overdue. But either way, I'm hoping we start to see a far more diverse economy start to come into view. Places like ArcCorp, for example, should be producing a hell of a lot more than waste and scrap. And they should be importing everything they need to make, say, motherboards and components and other manufactured goods that you would expect from a planet-wide factory and city. Like I said, I keep that one short, but I definitely have a lot more I'll be saying about that eventually. Let's just end this with a really fun speculative catch-all category of things I'm pretty certain won't be in 4.0, but hopefully aren't too far off. Okay, I lied. This is one that I know is in 4.0, new animations. We've been dealing with the same stock animations for a long time, and if you spent any time in Pyro in the PTU, you might not have even noticed this, but it looks like there's new character animations coming in. New walk cycles, new drunk cycles, new laying on the ground cycles, things like that. That's cool, at least for me as a former animator, because I've been talking for a long time that the fact that the verse is just too uniform in its character shapes and animations, it makes the verse feel, for lack of a better word, artificial. And yeah, I know it's a game, but for the game that prides itself on fidelity and immersion, just having a single male and a single female character body and one animation set for each, that just seems like a big oversight. A missed opportunity. But I know I've seen some new animations in Pyro, walk cycles and otherwise, and CIG devs are finally getting away from talking about metrics being the limiting factor in character shapes and sizes. In my opinion, that was never the case. It was always a matter of priority. Hopefully, this is one that rises on priorities a bit now that servers are kind of taking some of the load off. On that theme, hopefully we'll start seeing some aliens. Seems like a safe bet that at least one GN will be in Squadron 42. So while Tavarin being actual citizens of the human empire would make the most sense, GN are probably the most likely just because of the tie-in with Squadron 42. And yeah, I absolutely know we're not getting them for 4.0. Probably not even 4.2. But, I mean, I said this was a speculative section, right? Hopefully we start seeing some aliens sooner than later, along with some fat people, but maybe not as fat as your mom. Along with that, I want to start seeing different mission types, one with more nuance, more branches, more complication. Let's start seeing hints of a meta story, or even just a story and lore telling. And I'm not saying like ABC, you're going from here to here. I mean like world building. What is going on in the background of this entire universe? Are we just going from point A to point B, or is there something more complicated in the background? Are we playing a game in a society? For example, the Tessa Bannister missions, as I've said many times on this channel, were fantastic at this. You just find a black box of a destroyed ship in the last recording of the captain, and it just made the verse feel so much bigger. It's hard to explain how even something that small can just make the entire game feel way more real and visceral. I'm hoping for more wild lines from NPCs. I've started hearing some of these just walking around. I'm not sure if that was because they were limited by the servers where it just wasn't able to load up the wild lines, or if they've actually started putting wild lines into the game and now they're playing. I don't know which of those it is, but either way, I've started hearing them and now I want to hear a lot more. Something that would be awesome, missions, for lack of a better word, that you could find out by overhearing someone talk about it in a bar setting. Finally, a reason to just hang out in bars. Hear two patrons or the bartender, or maybe the bartender tells you directly, if you drop a good tip on them, say something about some guy that found thing X at this place on Pyro 2 with just enough info that maybe you could figure out where it is if you're clever enough. Of course, wild lines means paying voice actors to deliver them. Well, okay, maybe not in the days of AI generated voice actors, but I would assume the variations would still be limited, but it would still be cool to have that option. A sort of lower cost option would be maybe have a bartender lean over and say they heard a rumor. You flip them cash and they slide a location over to your Moby, or, details over to your Moby, no voice acting needed. Then the rumor may or may not be true. He just kind of leans over and says, hey, I heard a rumor. If you got some money, you float him some money, he pulls up his Moby, swipes his hand, and it appears on there. Again, it may or may not be true, or it may leave out some critical details. Who's to say? I just think that sort of thing is cool and immersive when games include it. Finally, I'm going to close this with the thing that I want to see most. Edible nachos and pizza. CIG, you have teased us with these items for far too long. Nachos and pizza, or we riot. So what about you? What are you looking for in 4.0? What are you going to do when the patch drops? Immediately head to Pyro, or enjoy the peace and quiet that'll sell us over Stanton in the absence of all those players who are popping over to Pyro? I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and that's really all I got for this one, gang. Catch me next time.